At work, they stood close, smiled, and whispered, "Don't be shy." And just like that, my quiet world shifted. I never considered myself the type of person who notices everything. I usually drift through workdays like a shadow, quietly observing the rhythm of the office without drawing attention to myself. But then they arrived, the two women who would quietly unravel the pattern of my routine. The first time I noticed them properly, it wasn't dramatic. They were just there, moving through the soft-lit corridors of our office, talking quietly to each other, the faint hum of fluorescent lights above mixing with the low clatter of keyboards. One of them carried herself with effortless confidence. She had that calm certainty in her movements, the kind of presence that seemed to bend space around her subtly. Her laughter, though soft, cut through the office noise like a gentle bell, lingering longer in my mind than the conversation itself. The other woman was quieter, almost reflective. She observed more than she spoke, her eyes always catching details most people miss: a stray paper, a crooked picture frame, the way my coffee cup tilts slightly too far to one side. I found myself drawn to them in a way that surprised me. Not for any superficial reason, though I won't deny they were both striking. It was the subtlety of their gestures, the way one tucks a strand of hair behind her ear absent-mindedly, or how the other's eyes light up when she notices a minor detail in the office. Their presence was warm, yet it carried an almost imperceptible tension that my chest couldn't ignore. I began noticing small details in my own behavior too. My hands would fidget when they were near. My gaze lingered a fraction longer than necessary when they laughed. My heart seemed to sink, however briefly, with the quiet rhythm of their movements. There was an unspoken gravity to it, a feeling that the office had grown smaller, more intimate, whenever they passed by. And yet I hesitated. I felt the subtle barrier of distance, not just the age difference, which whispered caution in the back of my mind, but the invisible lines that separate colleagues. I'd catch myself imagining conversations I never dared to start, moments of closeness that existed only in the private theater of my mind. Even their small gestures carried weight. A tilt of the head, a pause in conversation where their eyes might meet mine, a fleeting smile, each of these tiny movements resonated, creating a quiet tension I wasn't sure how to resolve. It was like standing on the edge of a still lake, sensing the pull beneath the surface, but hesitant to step in. By the end of that first week of noticing them, I felt a subtle shift inside myself. The office, once a routine of cubicles and soft lighting, now felt charged with possibility. Their presence had introduced something gentle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniably stirring. And though I hadn't spoken a word to them yet, I knew the quiet observation was only the beginning. Something was waiting, just beneath the surface, and I could feel it, patient, slow, and impossibly real. It started with a simple moment that I replayed in my mind far longer than I should have. I was hunched over my desk, fingers tapping lightly against the edge, when I felt it, the subtle shift of air, the presence of someone close enough to brush against me without touching. "Don't be shy," one of them said, her voice soft, almost teasing, but grounded in a warmth that made my chest tighten. I looked up, startled, and there they were, the two women I had been noticing from across the office. They were standing close, a little too close for casual work conversation, but not in any way that felt threatening. There was an ease in their proximity, as though they had every right to be there, and I was suddenly hyper-aware of how small I felt in comparison. The taller one, the confident one, leaned slightly on the edge of my desk, resting her hand casually nearby. The faint scent of her perfume, something soft and floral, mixed with the aroma of my coffee and made my stomach tighten. Her eyes held a steady, inviting gaze, and for a moment I was caught in the way the corners of her mouth tilted just slightly upward, hinting at amusement and expectation at the same time. The quieter woman lingered just behind, but not far enough to be ignored. I could see the subtle way her shoulders relaxed when she was near, and the slight brush of her sleeve against mine sent an almost electric awareness through me. Their closeness felt deliberate, but not overwhelming, an unspoken invitation to step into their world, if I dared. "Are you working on that report again?" the confident one asked, leaning just enough that our knees were nearly brushing. I nodded, words caught somewhere between my throat and my brain. There was a rhythm to the way they moved together, one leading softly, the other observing, mirroring, adjusting, and it made me acutely aware of how much I wanted to belong in that rhythm. I realized I was holding my breath. Every small gesture, the tilt of a head, the brief glance exchanged between them, the way one tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, felt weighted with meaning. I wanted to speak, to say something clever or casual, but my words refused to form. All I could do was watch them, feeling the subtle warmth radiate from their proximity. The moment stretched, a quiet tension that was neither rushed nor uncomfortable. When they finally smiled, one shyly, the other confidently, it was like the world contracted to the space around my desk. Their closeness wasn't just physical, it carried an emotional gravity, a gentle assertion that it was okay to exist here, to exist alongside them without pretense. By the time they moved on, leaving me blinking in stunned silence, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't just observing anymore, I had been invited in, without force, without demand. That tiny, deliberate approach had planted the first seed of a connection, and I could already feel the slow, irresistible pull towards something I didn't yet understand but desperately wanted to explore. After that first approach, the office felt different. The hum of computers, the faint clatter of keyboards, even the aroma of brewed coffee seemed charged with a quiet anticipation. I found myself noticing them more than ever, how one of them would tilt her head slightly when concentrating, how the other would tap her pen against a notebook with a rhythm that felt almost musical. It started with small exchanges, passing a report across the desk, a shared joke about a stubborn printer, a fleeting glance that lingered just a fraction longer than normal. Each moment was ordinary on the surface, but beneath it, there was a subtle tension, a delicate threading of attention that made my pulse quicken. One afternoon, as I was rearranging files, I felt the brush of a hand against mine. It was fleeting, barely a touch, but it sent a jolt of warmth up my arm. I glanced up, catching their eyes. The confident woman's gaze held steady, encouraging, while the quieter one offered a small, almost shy smile. My chest tightened at the awareness of their presence so close, the way the light from the window fell softly across their faces, highlighting features I hadn't truly seen before. We began sharing little moments that felt like stolen slices of time. A shared laugh over a mundane mistake, the subtle exchange of a comforting glance across the conference room, a quiet word of encouragement when the day felt heavy. Their presence seemed to make the air itself softer, the office walls warmer, the rhythm of my own heartbeat slower yet more insistent. And then came the touches, gentle, meaningful, never forced. A hand brushing against my shoulder as they passed by, a brief adjustment of my chair to sit closer during a meeting, a comforting pat on the back when a project was finished. Each gesture was small, deliberate, and charged with a warmth that went beyond casual friendship. My own hands felt strangely aware, my senses attuned to every subtle movement, every nuance of their expressions. What struck me most, however, were the glances, the lingering, unspoken conversations that passed between us without a single word. I'd catch the confident woman's eyes from across the room, her look carrying a mixture of amusement and quiet encouragement, while the quieter one's gaze held depth and curiosity, as though she were trying to understand not just what I was doing, but who I was. The effect was intoxicating, a silent pull that made the hum of the office feel like a private rhythm only we shared. In those moments, I realized that what I felt was no longer mere fascination. It was a careful, slow-growing attachment, threaded through touches and glances, small acts of attention that spoke louder than words ever could. And as I returned their looks, caught in the warmth of their presence, I understood that the ordinary day-to-day world of our office had shifted, becoming something more intimate, more meaningful, and entirely impossible to ignore. The tension wasn't urgent or desperate, it was quiet, deliberate, and magnetic. I didn't need words to feel it. Every shared glance, every small gesture, every laugh and brush of skin was a promise, a delicate invitation to step closer, to trust, to feel, and perhaps, to let something extraordinary begin. The office had emptied for the evening, leaving only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant clatter of traffic outside. I was still at my desk, organizing a stack of papers, when they appeared again, quietly, almost like a presence that had always been there, waiting for me to notice. "Mind if we sit?" the confident one asked, her voice gentle but certain. She gestured to the chairs across from me, and I found myself nodding before I could second-guess it. The quieter woman lingered just behind her, setting her bag down carefully, her movements graceful, deliberate. I suddenly became acutely aware of how small the space between us felt now, the way the light from my desk lamp cast soft shadows across their faces. We started talking about work, at first, the kind of casual conversation that could have happened with anyone. But gradually, the rhythm shifted. They began sharing snippets of their lives, the challenges they'd faced, the small victories that never made it to anyone else's notice. One spoke of a difficult decision at work, her voice tinged with vulnerability beneath the composed exterior. The other shared a memory from her past, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug absent-mindedly, eyes distant yet warm. I felt an unexpected pull to respond honestly, to let my own guard down. I spoke of my quiet anxieties, my tendency to overthink, the little moments of loneliness that crept in between the routine of tasks and deadlines. They listened, not in the way colleagues politely nod, but in the way people lean in, attuned to the unspoken weight behind the words. There was a moment when our hands brushed lightly on the table. It wasn't dramatic, but the warmth of contact lingered, a subtle tether that made my chest tighten pleasantly. The confident woman's fingers rested near mine for just a heartbeat longer than necessary, and I caught the flicker of something in her eyes, a recognition, a shared understanding of the silent layers between us. The quieter one shifted slightly closer, her shoulder nearly touching mine, and I felt a comforting steadiness radiate from her presence. We fell into a quiet rhythm of confession and listening. Laughter softened the edges of heavier moments, and the pauses between words were filled with an unspoken connection. I noticed the small details, the confident one's hair falling across her cheek as she laughed, the way the quieter one's eyes crinkled with amusement, the subtle scent of their perfumes blending with the faint musk of late-night office air. By the time we stood to leave, I felt an unfamiliar warmth, a sense of closeness that went beyond casual friendship. There was no rush, no overt urgency, only the shared understanding that these moments mattered. The trust had been established quietly, delicately, through stories, touches, and lingering glances that spoke louder than words ever could. Walking back to my desk after they left, I realized the shift inside me. They weren't just colleagues anymore. They were anchors, subtle and grounding, drawing me into a space I hadn't allowed myself to inhabit before. The slow, quiet pull of connection had begun, and I knew, with a clarity that both thrilled and terrified me, that the real journey, the one that mattered, was only starting. After that evening, everything felt heavier, yet in a way that made the world sharper, more vivid. The office, once a place of routine tasks and predictable interactions, now seemed charged with the memory of their presence. Every laugh, every subtle touch, every glance replayed in my mind, making it impossible to focus fully on the spreadsheets and reports that normally occupied my hours. And yet, alongside the warmth I felt, there was hesitation. A quiet, persistent tug of caution rooted deep in my chest. They were older, wiser in ways I could sense but not always articulate, and I was painfully aware of the unspoken lines, the expectations of professionalism, the eyes of colleagues, the gossip that could arise from a bond that didn't fit neatly into workplace norms. My mind raced with what-ifs. What if I misread their gestures? What if this changes everything in the wrong way? I found myself noticing my own behavior more than ever. I lingered slightly too long over a keyboard, adjusting my chair again and again to avoid brushing against them too soon. My hands felt clumsy, fumbling over pens or papers when their eyes were on me, and my chest tightened in anticipation of a smile or a glance. Even small touches, an accidental brush of a hand, a shared notebook, sent a rush of adrenaline through me, immediately followed by a pang of guilt or fear. The internal conflict wasn't simple. Part of me ached to be closer, to let the warmth of their presence wash over me, to linger in the subtle intimacy we had begun to share. But another part recoiled, reminding me of boundaries and consequences. The age gap, though never spoken, felt like a quiet barrier, one that could either deepen the connection or make it impossible to navigate without misstep. I caught myself imagining scenarios that were simultaneously comforting and terrifying. I pictured casual touches lingering a moment too long, shared laughter that drew curious eyes, quiet confessions spoken in the sanctuary of an empty office. Each imagined scene was vivid enough to make my pulse quicken, and yet every one carried a whisper of hesitation, an awareness that desire and propriety were intertwined in ways I wasn't sure I could untangle. Even outside the office, their presence lingered. I found myself replaying their voices in my head, the confident one's gentle teasing, the quieter one's reflective tones, over and over, analyzing every nuance, every pause, every subtle encouragement. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance with a message, a note, or even a simple hello that lingered longer than necessary, but my hesitation held me back. And yet, despite the anxiety and self-doubt, there was a magnetic pull I could not deny. The hesitation only made the small moments we shared feel heavier with meaning. Every brush of a hand, every meeting of eyes, every subtle smile was now layered with a tension that was impossible to ignore. I realized, with a mixture of awe and fear, that my heart had already begun to navigate a path I didn't fully understand, but one I was inexplicably drawn toward. It was late afternoon when the office finally emptied, leaving only the faint hum of the air conditioning and the soft glow of desk lamps. I was stacking papers, absently tapping a pen, when they appeared again, almost like they had been waiting for the world to quiet down so we could exist in this small, charged bubble together. "Hey," the confident one said softly, leaning against the edge of my desk. She didn't need to say more, the warmth of her presence was enough to make my pulse quicken. The quieter woman lingered beside her, resting a hand lightly on my chair as if to anchor herself in the same space. I realized, suddenly, how close we were, our knees nearly brushing, the faint scent of their perfumes mingling with the lingering aroma of my coffee. Every nerve ending felt alive. We talked about small things at first, work, deadlines, trivial office mishaps, but beneath the words, a different conversation was happening. Every glance, every pause, every smile carried layers of meaning. I noticed the confident woman's fingers drumming lightly on the desk near mine, a rhythm that somehow made my heartbeat feel both urgent and steady. The quieter one shifted slightly, her shoulder brushing mine ever so lightly, a gesture that seemed accidental yet deliberate. Then came the moment, a subtle, perfect convergence of time and feeling. We were laughing quietly at some absurd mistake one of us had made, and I felt a hand, just the edge of it, rest against my arm. My chest tightened at the warmth of contact. It wasn't forceful or dramatic, just a simple, lingering touch that carried the weight of unspoken trust. My mind stuttered, aware of the pull, aware of the electricity in the air, aware of how natural it felt to be allowed this closeness. Their eyes met mine in the same instant, and for a heartbeat, everything else vanished. There was no rush, no clamor of urgent desire, just a stillness filled with connection, intimacy, and the quiet recognition that we were all aware of this slow, inevitable pull between us. I felt the confident one's gaze steady and encouraging, while the quieter one's eyes offered a softer, almost protective warmth. Both felt like home. We shared a pause that lasted longer than words could hold. The air seemed to hum between us, carrying the invisible thread of understanding, of tentative affection, of desire restrained yet unmistakable. I could feel the subtle warmth of their proximity against me, the casual weight of presence that made every breath feel heavier, richer, more immediate. When we finally moved, it was with a mutual, unspoken understanding. A hand lingered just a second longer on my arm as we straightened, a subtle squeeze of reassurance. A brief brush of hair, a tilt of the head, a shared smile that held far more than the casual surface suggested. And then they left, carrying with them the quiet gravity of a connection that had grown deeper, more intimate, and undeniably real. I sat back in my chair, aware of the tension still thrumming through me, aware that something had shifted irreversibly. The slow, careful pull that had begun weeks ago had reached a peak, not with drama or fireworks, but with quiet, electrifying intimacy. And in that stillness, I realized that our bond had passed a threshold. Nothing was urgent, Nothing was forced, yet everything had changed. The days after that quiet, electric afternoon felt different in ways I hadn't anticipated. The office, which had once been a simple backdrop of tasks and routines, now seemed layered with subtle possibilities. Every glance across a meeting table, every small gesture in the hallway, carried the gentle weight of connection that had grown between us. It was during a late Friday afternoon that the shift became undeniable. The office was mostly empty, the soft hum of computers and the distant chatter from the cleaning crew creating a cocoon of quiet. I was sorting through my desk when they appeared again, their presence filling the small space with warmth I could feel in my chest. "Hey," the confident one said, her voice casual yet steady, as though she'd known I was thinking of her all day. She leaned slightly against my desk, just close enough for our knees to brush. The quieter woman lingered beside her, resting a hand briefly on my chair, a gesture of familiarity and care. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just the subtle assertion of closeness. We settled into conversation, and this time it didn't feel like we were testing the waters. The previous hesitations had melted into comfort. Laughter flowed freely, tinged with the easy warmth of shared understanding. They listened when I spoke, really listened, and I found myself speaking more openly than I ever had before, sharing small dreams, private worries, and the quiet quirks of my life. Each word, each pause, each smile deepened the sense of intimacy we had nurtured over weeks of careful observation, fleeting touches, and lingering glances. Then came the gestures that marked the culmination of everything we had been building. The confident woman rested her hand lightly on my arm as we laughed at a shared memory, her touch deliberate yet gentle, sending warmth through me that was more emotional than physical. The quieter one leaned slightly closer, brushing my shoulder with a casual grace that felt like home. Every small movement, the tilt of a head, the lingering eye contact, the faint smiles that passed between us, spoke volumes about the bond we had quietly cultivated. I realized, in that moment, that the age difference, the workplace, the hesitation, they were no longer barriers. They had become part of the tapestry of our connection, giving depth and texture to something that was patient, respectful, and entirely human. I felt seen, understood, and cared for in a way that transcended words. As the day ended, they stood together, framed by the fading sunlight streaming through the office windows. I caught their eyes once more, one steady, confident, encouraging, the other soft, observant, quietly grounding. And then, almost instinctively, we shared a final gesture, a gentle squeeze of my arm, a lingering glance, and a smile that held all the warmth, trust, and promise of what had begun between us. Walking back to my desk after they left, I felt a quiet contentment settle in my chest. There was no rush, no need for dramatic declarations, just the knowledge that the slow, careful journey we had taken together had reached a place of genuine connection. The tension had melted into intimacy, the hesitation into comfort, and the warmth of their presence lingered long after they had gone. For the first time in a long while, I felt entirely at ease, aware of the bond we shared, excited for its future, and quietly certain that something extraordinary had begun, patient and steady, just as it was meant to be.